Hello. Today's episode is a little bit different from our usual programming because I will be reading aloud a newsletter edition of Make India Competitive Again by my colleague, the Ken reporter, Mrunmay Kulkarni, and it is worth your full attention. This piece is about a word that you've been hearing a lot lately: sovereign. Sovereign AI, sovereign cloud, sovereign compute. India is spending over 10,000 crore rupees building it. But Mrunmay's argument is quite pointed. She says nobody has actually defined what this word means. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from the Ken. I'm your host Nigda Sharma, and I don't chase the news cycle. Instead, every day of the week, my colleague Rachel Varghese and I will come to you with one business story that's worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Tuesday, the 16th of July. Humans have always wanted to own things: land, resources, gold, oil, now apparently AI. Ever since we learned to make weapons out of pointy objects, we have built empires just to stay independent of someone else's influence. Different currencies, strict immigration controls, data localization laws, all of it at its core an attempt to stay in charge of our own resources, to become quote unquote sovereign. The AI universe is no different. The problem is, no one quite knows what the term means. What even is sovereign? An analyst at a VC firm asked me. Is it when data is stored in India? Is it when startups use India AI missions compute? An undefined standard means that the gaps get filled by someone else. Let's say an American cloud provider gets a US warrant for data stored in India. It has two options: comply and potentially violate Indian law, or refuse and violate US law. That's a contradiction that already exists inside every hyperscaler like AWS, Google, and Meta operating in India. It just hasn't been tested yet. Meanwhile, India is still figuring out what sovereign AI even means. On the 13th of April, the government set up the Technology and Policy Expert Committee, or TPEC, which is a six-member council tasked with designing India's AI governance framework. Among other things, it will identify regulatory gaps and define the contours of India's AI policy. There is no deadline for its first report, even though India is already spending 10,300 crore rupees on building what it calls sovereign AI. And it's calling a lot of things sovereign. At India's AI Impact Summit 2026 in February, it was the word of the season. Ashwini Vaishnav said it, Modi said it, Hardeep Puri said it, and in its pavilion, NASA, the company entrusted with building India's AI infrastructure, promised, and I'm quoting, instant sovereign GPU access. NVIDIA put out a press release soon after calling India's AI infrastructure sovereign, ironically, on NVIDIA's Blackwell GPUs. There is no legal standard or technical requirement to be classified as sovereign. So the hyperscalers and Indian companies self certify in a way. Microsoft calls its India offering a sovereign cloud. Google offers in country data processing. Amazon has compliance zones. Because the bar does not exist, clearing it is easy. And all of it runs on chips from a single American company. If Nvidia changes its pricing, restricts its exports, or decides India is a lower priority market, the entire sovereign compute program feels it. Here is how the sovereign cloud pitch works. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have all made elaborate sovereignty promises to their Indian customers: data residency, customer managed keys, operational transparency, and pledges to legally challenge any foreign government order that threatens customer data. Seemingly airtight stuff. There is, however, a telling detail in the fine print. Their infrastructure is connected to global systems operated by US headquartered companies and subject to US law. And US law, since 2018, includes the Cloud Act, which compels American tech companies and any company with a legal presence in the US to hand over stored data to American authorities regardless of where that data physically sits. Technically, a subpoena can reach data in Microsoft's Mumbai data center. The server's postcode might be Indian, but its legal obligations are not. Microsoft has been here before. When the US government demanded access to emails stored on its servers in Dublin, Microsoft refused and fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. They won at the appellate level. Then, while the Supreme Court was still deliberating, Congress passed the Cloud Act, which explicitly extended US warrants extraterritorially. The case was dismissed as moot, and Dublin's data was never quite as Irish as it looked. Mumbai is in a similar position. In June 2025, Microsoft's France Director of Public and Legal Affairs appeared before the French Senate and admitted under oath that he could not guarantee French citizen data would never reach US authorities without French authorization. If Microsoft cannot make that promise in France, which is a country with the full force of European data protection regulation behind it, it cannot make it in India either. India's own data protection law, which is the DPDP Act, was notified in November 2025. But it is the wrong instrument for this problem. For cross border transfers, the Act uses a negative list approach. Data can be transferred to any country unless the central government specifically prohibits it, which is the opposite of the EU's more restrictive framework. Section 16, which governs this, also only becomes enforceable in May 2027. And more importantly, the DPDP Act deals with data leaving India. It says nothing about foreign governments compelling access to data sitting in India. And that's a different legal problem entirely, and one that no current Indian legislation addresses. The sovereign cloud is, at present, a promise lacking strong legislative backing. Before a founder in India writes a single line of code, the infrastructure has already made several decisions for them. The Ken had earlier reported on how the hyperscalers are embedded into the ecosystem long before a startup has a product, through VC credits, accelerator programs, and government schemes. Neutrality is compromised even at the policy layer, and no major accelerator or government scheme is infrastructure agnostic by design. The hardware layer compounds this. To build an AI model, you need a GPU, and NVIDIA built its entire AI research ecosystem around this need. To protect the most popular GPUs, you need to write in CUDA, a programming language NVIDIA developed and owns and which only runs on its own hardware. Every major framework, including the likes of PyTorch and TensorFlow, was optimized for CUDA first. So when a founder picks a stack, they are essentially signing a long term agreement with NVIDIA pricing, supply chain, and roadmap. AMD, the American semiconductor company, makes competing chips which are also sometimes cheaper. Its MI300X costs around $15,000 per chip, while NVIDIA's H100 has sold for upwards of $32,000. The AMD chip matches or outperforms the H100 on several workloads and has more than double the memory. But it just doesn't have the ecosystem gravity. Switching chips later also carries a real cost. Rewrite the code base, retrain the team, rebuild the workflow. NVIDIA essentially built a system that almost feels impossible to leave. That dependency runs upward. The India AI Mission's compute infrastructure, YOTA, LNT, E2E networks, runs on NVIDIA's Blackwell GPUs. So India's sovereign AI stack is, at its foundation, a single vendor's product. An analyst at a VC firm said, and I'm quoting, "We are incredibly entangled with the global AI ecosystem, both in terms of tech and infrastructure. To claim that we are building something totally our own, this generation's version of Swadesi, is stretching the truth a bit." So, India pays the NVIDIA premium, calls the infrastructure sovereign, and moves on. India is not alone in having an unclear definition of sovereign. A few months ago, the UK government announced a $675 million sovereign AI fund. Technology Secretary Liz Kendall called it unlike anything the government has ever done before. Fast tracked visas, supercomputing access, equity for British AI startups, and yet there was no clarity about what sovereign actually means. Industry advisors pushed back almost immediately, arguing that the fund prioritizes self sufficiency over adoption at a time when only 1 in 6 UK firms has actually adopted AI in core operations. Vendors were clear as well. Optionality beats sovereignty. Their ability to switch is worth more than the ability to claim independence. Nobody built an empire by defining its ceiling first. But the UK did clear one thing up. It signed the US UK Cloud Act agreement, which gives British law enforcement reciprocal access to American data as well as a right to challenge any American overreach on data stored in Britain. India, however, has not negotiated any such bilateral data access agreement with the US. A legal expert familiar with Meitei's regulatory framework said, and I'm quoting, India is not a signatory to the Budapest Convention, which the US requires before signing any such agreement. And right now, India and the US are arguing about tariffs, not collaborating on data access frameworks. The prerequisites do not exist, and the diplomatic moment is not right. Another solution, much closer to home, the legal expert added, would be a sovereign by design standard. Before a company can call its cloud sovereign, it has to actually prove it against a checklist, like technical requirements, legal guarantees, the works. He said TPEC has the mandate to recommend exactly this. Sovereignty in our current situation is less a shield or standard and more of a fashion accessory tech companies tack on. India is spending 10,300 crore rupees for the illusion of owning what it wouldn't actually own given the current system. But ownership was never the only way ahead. Optionality, which is the ability to switch providers and move workloads, matters more. The ability to avoid being fully captive means diversifying chip dependencies, setting enforceable standards, and even keeping multiple vendors in play. Meanwhile, the word sovereign continues to be in every press release and speech. So far, it has raised money and hopes, justified subsidies, and launched pavilions. Everything except actually acquiring a definition. So, the servers hum away in Mumbai, built with foreign chips, Indian money, and a very sovereign ambition. Nobody is entirely sure whose rules they follow. Before you go, here's one for the Daybreak crowd. Restaurants have the highest mortality rate of any business. Some even say 95% by the end of the second year. But Riaz Amlani has somehow been building them for over 25 years. And you have probably eaten at some of them: Social, Smokehouse Deli, Antisocial, Mocha. This week, he is on the Ken's First Principles podcast with Rohin Dharmakumar. Riaz talks about why restaurants really die, the shisha ban that wiped out 80% of his business overnight, and his uneasy truce with the digital landlords Zomato and Swiggy. Part 1 of the conversation is out and it's free. Just search for First Principles wherever you're listening.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of the Ken, India's first subscriber-focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber-only offerings, and a full subscription offers daily, long-form feature stories, newsletters, and a whole bunch of premium podcasts. To subscribe, head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the website. Today's episode was hosted and produced by my colleague Snigdha Sharma and edited by Rajiv CN.